Hi, I'm Stephen Hale. I'm the Academic Director of the Graduate Certificate, Graduate Diploma and Master's degree in the Economics of Sustainability of Modern Money Lab and Torrens University, Australia. And I'm joined today by Stephanie Kelton, who is Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Stony Brook University in Long Island, author of the 2020 New York Times bestseller, The Deficit Myth, former Chief Economist on the Senate Budget Committee in Washington, DC, and many other things too. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Your book and your blog have been hugely influential in the last few years, including with our students. How did we come to know each other?
Well, I think we got to know one another well when I was here in January of 2020 at your invitation, really. I mean, I was the Harcourt visiting professor, and I think I got to spend almost 2 weeks in Adelaide, and I was finishing up the book, and I think that you and I spent a little bit of time working through one of the chapters that I was sort of struggling to edit and get back to the publisher so that they could actually have the final manuscript, and I think that's where we got to know one another the best.
Yeah, and we ran a conference here at the time with, I think, over 400 people at the conference, and indirectly that conference led on to us talking to Torrens University and devising this program, which we've been running out for 2 years. With your support, it's great to have you as an adjunct or honorary professor at the university, and it's been great to have you involved in a couple of events with our students in the last couple of years. I think our program is the only one in the world, definitely as far as online programs is concerned, where modern monetary theory is either the basis of or at least influences every subject in the program. I think that's important. Do you agree?
What you've done, Stephen, honestly, is beyond what I ever would have imagined. I mean, I taught for many years at a university where we had lots of MMT economists, but the whole of the program wasn't really infused with MMT. And this is, I mean, you've taken this to a whole nother level here, and it's really inspiring to watch what you've done and to see the enthusiasm. You've got students from all over the world, and I know that many of them have to join. Sometimes they join in real time, and it might be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they want to be sure that they're there for the live portion of some interaction with some of the incredible faculty that you have. So I'm just thrilled to see, what you've built and continue to build with Torrens University.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. I should add that they don't have to be up at 3 a.m. We run everything twice, but we have several students who come to both live webinars in the subject doing
That's
at the
what
moment.
I mean.
And so they do. They
That's
get up in the middle of the night.
They can't get enough.
Absolutely right.
Enough.
Yes, yes. We have some people you know quite well teaching for us: Scott Fulweiler, John Harvey, Eric Dean, not to mention me. Do you think these are good people to study with?
Well, they're great people to study with.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Some of them are my former colleagues.
Yeah.
Scott Fulweiler was a former colleague, Eric Dean was a student of ours. John Harvey is so incredible that I invite him to guest lecture in a course that I teach. So when I'm handpicking people that I think are outstanding in the classroom, that bring something that I think is important, that I want my students to hear, these are the kinds of people that I pick. And sometimes I only get a one-off lecture, and you get a whole course out of some of them. So it's really remarkable.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate in who we've been able to have join in the program.
Yeah,
It's
no
been great
question.
to have them. We have 2 themes, I suppose, going through the master's degree. MMT is one of them. The other one is environmental sustainability. How do they fit together?
Well, it's really difficult to imagine doing one without the other, really. To do economics well, I think, is to recognize some of the insights that MMT has long emphasized, which are, real resource constraints and inflation limits and so forth, but really, truly building in the ecological constraints and helping people appreciate why it's important to do that, why you can't just sort of passively mention that one must pay attention to things like planetary boundaries and then move along, but to really do that kind of deep dive and to properly integrate that into a macroeconomic framework is creating an offering that I don't think exists anywhere else in the world.
Why are you in Adelaide at the moment?
Well, we're here to bring this film, this documentary, which is in a sense the story of MMT. In many ways, it's called Finding the Money, and we're screening it in major cities all across the country for the next 10 days or so, and I think it got started even before I arrived. You know, this is a film that tells the story of the kind of rise to prominence of MMT. Where did this framework come from? How did it kind of catch fire? What does it offer us by way of, you know, giving us new ways to think about some big things, especially the way we think about the capacity of the government to spend money, the mechanics of government finance. Where does money come from? How does it all work? Why do we pay taxes? And should we worry about things like deficits and the debt? This film addresses all of those questions and answers them in ways that really run counter to just about everything we've been taught to believe. And so I think it's been exciting for audiences to sit through this and sort of have their minds blown. But I think what they come away with is almost a sense of, well, of course, right? It seems so intuitive once it's laid out for you. So that's why I'm here, and I'm hoping that, you know, this will advance the debate that we have over, you know, what we can actually afford to do as a nation in ways that, you know, shift the conversation, open up some space for us to think more ambitiously about what we're capable of, and to stop having the wrong debate, stop arguing about the wrong things, and get focused on what really matters.
So we're not saying that there are no limits on government spending.
No, we're not saying there are no limits. We're saying the limits are there and they're real, and we have to pay attention to them. We have to respect the real limits. Capacity constraints in our economy, there's inflation that you have to worry about, there are ecological and planetary boundaries, but the things we've been taught to worry about, the number that pops out of the budget box at the end of each year, the size of the national debt, those are kind of distractions from the things that really matter, and that's what the film tries to get across.
There is at least one famous economist in the film who says that you say deficit spending can be a problem because of the inflation constraint, because of a real resource constraint. We say that deficit spending is a problem because of issues to do with what we call fiscal sustainability and the ratio of the national debt to GDP rising over time. And those two things get us to roughly the same place, so that the issue doesn't really matter. No, we don't agree with those people. Why?
The person you're referring to has worried about deficits and debt for a long time, and in fact was part of the Obama administration. He was an economic advisor to the president, and at the time was pushing deficit reduction, not because he was worried about inflation, but because he was worried about the deficit per se. And so it doesn't get you to roughly the same place. In fact, where it got us was to a long period where the government was pursuing, the administration, a Democratic president and his administration were pursuing austerity for the sake of trying to achieve a smaller deficit, not because they were worried about inflation. So I would argue that we got really poor economic policy during those years, and that it cost us in many ways. It cost society. We had a much more sluggish recovery from the global financial crisis, the Great Recession. We could have done so much more to repair the damage that had been done, but instead we, pivoted to austerity, and we had what basically amounted to a lost decade.
And we had much the same thing in Australia, actually. You could tell precisely the same story.
Yeah.
It's no secret that you've signed on to write another book. Can you tell us anything about it at all, or perhaps when we can expect it to come out?
Well, okay,
I'm not expecting you to tell us the title or exactly what's in it. Is it another edition of the deficit myth, or will it be something different?
Well, it has to be something different. Yeah. But it is, in some ways, a continuation of that story. And I do kind of like the myth busting. I think there are still a lot of things that we get wrong. And some of the lessons that, unfortunately, I think have been learned in the wake of the policy response to COVID need to be addressed and straightened out before we get ourselves into real trouble. So the next book will take me probably a year and a half to write. I've just signed a contract for publishing that next book, so I've got a lot of work to do. Late 2025 maybe people can look for that. Early 2026, maybe.
But what we're pushing for really is nothing short of a paradigm shift in macroeconomics and in framing economic policy issues generally. That's not going to be easy to bring about.
Well, no, there's a lot of resistance, a lot of entrenched interests. You know how the academy works. Economists are very protective of their domain, and the sort of big boys like to have conversations among themselves and often not invite folks who have a very different way of thinking about things to be part of the conversation. They prefer to interact with people who differ at the margins, whereas we come essentially with a completely different macroeconomic framework, a different paradigm. So it's more difficult in some ways to have conversations with us because we see the world so differently. And so you have to kind of elbow your way in to have a place in some of these debates. And I think we've been pretty successful at that so far, but you have to keep going. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Well, you've been hugely successful. The deficit myth was on the New York Times bestseller list. It must have been the best-selling economics book in 2020.
I'm very, very blessed to have seen that book do as well as it did. And you know, it's funny because it's been adopted not just by economists. There are people who teach and adopt the book and use it in their classrooms, and I love that. But I get emails from high school teachers who use it. I get emails from history professors, sociology professors, political science professors, social people who teach social work. And I show up with, you know, in the Zoom, and I go meet with the students if they're using the book. But the reward is not just that, which is hugely rewarding, but just how accessible the book has been to lay people with no background in economics who, you know, you see a book with the title The Deficit Myth. Well, who in the world wants to read about budget deficits? But somehow people really want to understand. They want to understand what it is that people are constantly harping on about on television and radio programs and so forth. You know, as long as people are banging on about, you know, debt and deficits and all of that sort of stuff, people will be looking for a book like that to help them make sense of things.
Well, I know we were largely ignored, or at least I was, in Australia until you came last time in January 2020, and then the deficit myth came out. And then after that, we got invitations from commercial banks and investment banks, and Torrens were kind enough to agree for us to run this program. That book and your work generally has been the biggest inspiration for what we've been doing, and we're very grateful. And it's great that you're an adjunct professor or honorary professor at Torrens, and it's been terrific having you talk to our students the last couple of years, and I hope you'll go on doing that in the future.
I sure will. Your students are among the most dedicated that I've interacted with. They're here and they know why they're here. They know why they're signing up for these courses. And so you have the luxury of getting to teach to students who actually want to be there every single day that they log in. And I couldn't wish you better success, and I know that the program is just going to continue to attract more and more students. So hugely proud of what you're doing here.
Thanks very much, Stephanie.
You're welcome. Thank you.